Hello there, my name's Annette with Sunbeam Fabric Art and Sunbeam FPP. Welcome to my channel. I got a beautiful fat quarter bundle containing 42 different fat quarters for Christmas in 2025, and I cut up all 42 of those into two 10-inch squares and three 2.5-inch strips. Today I wanted to use up as many of these 2.5-inch strips as I could. I went through and tried to figure out how many of these strips there were, since I cut 3 from each fat quarter, and there are 42 fabrics, each one different. I've got 3 half strips of each print. Even though these fabrics do have sort of lights and sort of mediums, I wanted some contrast, so I went to my stash to see what I had, and I had a couple of honey buns, and those are 1.5-inch wide strips of fabric. To save myself a little bit of time, I'm going to take 2 of the identical prints, 2.5-inch strips, and I'm going to stitch those together. I'm going to be stitching those skinnier strips to the 2.5-inch wide strips. So if I go ahead and put some of these half strips together to make a whole strip, that'll make that whole chain piecing process go a little bit more smoothly. That extra half strip for each print, I'm going to be setting aside. When I got to the end of those strips, I trimmed off the excess triangles and set those aside, and I pressed the seam flat. I also trimmed off the little dog ears. I rolled up this group of 42 half strips. I'm going to set those aside. I'm not sure if I'm going to use them for this quilt or something in the future. I left these strips in the same order that I had them in when I cut apart the original fat quarter bundles. So there is a light next to a medium shade or a lighter next to a darker shade, and I decided I'm going to keep those in the same order, and as I make my blocks for my plan, I'm going to keep them in the same order and just stitch them into the quilt in that same order. My plan is to make strip tube blocks. I am taking 2 of the 2.5-inch strips, setting those to the left, and then putting a black skinny strip on top. Then I take 2 more of the print 2.5-inch strips and set a white skinny strip on top of that. And we'll skip ahead and I'll show you what I'm going to be doing for chain piecing. I'm going to begin stitching 3 strips together with the skinny strip in the middle of the 2 print strips. When you sew long strips like this together, you may end up getting something called bowing, where your fabric edge wants to curve over a long distance. To avoid that bowing effect, what you want to do is stitch seams in opposite directions. So I'm going to do each set of 3 strips separately on its own, one at a time. I'm going to stitch down one side, then I'm going to flip the unit the opposite way, add the other 2.5-inch strip to the outside, and stitch that seam as well. I'm trying not to break my thread so that my fabric won't get sucked down into the feed dog area. So you'll frequently see me here starting a new seam, and then I'll reach around the back at some point and cut off that first part. My skinny strips are a little bit longer than the joined half strips of the 2.5 inch wide fabric. I am going to go ahead and save all those little strips, and as I go, I'm going to stitch those together. I don't know what I'm going to do with those yet, and as of the recording of this voiceover, I still don't know what I'm going to do, but maybe you'll have some ideas and leave those in the comments. That first trio of strips has been placed off to my far left, and as I finish those trios of strips, I'm going to keep that stack in the same order. This fat quarter bundle had every color practically in the color wheel, and that's kind of my vision for the blocks that I'm going to be making, is that it's going to follow the color wheel through the quilt. As I continue to sew these trios of strips together, you can see that little scrap piece I'm making with the short white and black strips is getting a little bit long. I'm not sure, again, what I'm going to do with that. Before I take the next step, I do need to take the time to press each of these strip trios nice and flat. If I was making like a 9 patch or something like that out of these strip trios, I probably would be concerned with which way I was pressing. In this case, I'm just pressing every seam the same direction. Looking at these strip sets from above, you can see in a couple of places where they want to bow off into a curve, but because I did the seams in opposite directions, the bowing just can't take over. I've still got all these strips in the same order that I had them in originally. I'm going to just start at the top of the stack. I'm going to take 2 of these strip trios, put them right sides together, stitch down one side, and then back down the opposite side. Knowing the type of block I'm making, I tried to decide, do I want the lights to be stitched together on one side, the darks on one side, or do I want to flip one around the opposite way? I decided that I would stitch them right sides together with the 2 darkest fabrics on the same side. Depending on your seam accuracy for this whole strip trio and the cutting skills, I mean, I cut these 2.5 inch strips myself. Then I've got 2 honey buns, or those 1.5 inch wide strips. Those may or may not be 100% accurate, as we know. I kept a close eye on that seam edge. You could go into this with a little bit wider seam, and that would solve a little bit of this. There were a couple of strip sets where I came very close to not getting that 1/4 inch seam. One of the strip sets was just a little bit skinnier than the other one. I just kept an eye on that as I went along, and if I had to, I went back over and stitched a seam twice. I only had to do that one time though, on a very short section of a strip set. I did chain piece the entire stack first. Then when I was done with that first pass, I pulled out all the fabric from behind my sewing machine, flipped it around the other way, and stitched down the other side as well. And this completes what we call a strip tube, because you can put your hand in there like a sleeve. We've got a seam on both sides, and two different layers are right sides together. I have this handy dandy ruler here called a strip tube ruler, and it is made just for this type of project. Now, in some of my past videos, I have had to use a giant ruler because my strip tubes were so large. And also in this video, a little bit towards the end of cutting these apart, I'm going to show you how I use my regular 12.5-inch Omni Grip ruler to do the exact same thing. There's no magic to this ruler. It just is nicely marked for us to follow. I'm lining up that 7-inch line on the ruler itself along my horizontal seam line. I need the peak of the triangle to be only a stitch over this seam line at the top there, because we're going to have to take that apart. Once this triangle's cut out, it'll open up on that bottom 7-inch seam and make a square block. You will also see me setting aside all those little sections that are not big enough for a full triangle. I'm definitely going to be saving every bit of scrap from this strip tube cutting. I decided I did not feel like turning this ruler upside down. I felt like turning the fabric the other way so it would be easier for me to cut with my right hand. On this last strip tube, I'm going to show you how I use my regular 12.5-inch ruler to cut the exact same thing. So I've got my diagonal line on this ruler. I'm going to line that up on that stitch line. We are making a 7-inch block, so that bottom seam line, I need at least 7.5 inches. Counting up from that right-hand side of my ruler there, up 7 inches is right about the peak of that triangle. Now I flipped that cut edge the opposite way, and now my center diagonal line on my ruler can go on that top seam. And again, I am going to be coming down 7 inches on the sides of the ruler. And these two strip tube squares are exactly the same size. Again, I went back to my strip tube ruler, which is perfect for a smaller strip tube like this, but I have used that green ruler many a times on a large strip tube. Here is a preview of my layout, so you can see I'm trying to keep those color families all together. I'm not going to change the order. I know that my layout is going to be 8 blocks by 7 blocks. And the best part about this quilt, I can chain piece every single pair of blocks together by stitching so that the black skinny fabric forms a peak. Every pair will be stitched together exactly the same way. Because of that bulky seam at one end of this seam that I'm stitching right now, I decided to flip the blocks upside down so that the black fabric makes a V, and this way I don't have a big bulky area to start this seam. As I broke the chain, I did go ahead and count the individual blocks. I had 60 individual blocks. I only need 56 for my 7x8 layout. Because I've got a nice number in my layout, like a number 8, I'm going to be able to sew all the pairs together, and then sew the pairs into 4s and the 4s into 8s to make 7 rows. As I'm joining my pairs together, I want to make sure those black triangles are aligned the same way as the pair next to them. And I decided to flip these around so that the black makes a peak now, because that way that bulky seam is going to be at the bottom of my stitch line instead of the beginning. If you feel more comfortable, you can use clips or pins to keep these fabrics together as you get them to the sewing machine. One other thing you need to know about this type of block, every edge of your block, all 4 outside edges, are going to be stretchy. So you want to be very careful as you stitch, not to tug too much, not to pull too much. Just try to let everything go through under the needle pretty easily. Once I got 4 blocks joined together, I took 2 of those sets and put them together to make my row of 8 blocks. To put my rows together, I want to make sure that my black skinny strips make a diamond shape together. So I'm going to be joining those so that the black skinny strips make that diamond or square shape. Again, you can use clips or pins to hold your rows together as you stitch them. And you will also see some of those bulky seams have overhang, dog ears hanging off. I cut those as I went along or in advance. It just depended on when I noticed them. If you are new to this type of quilt, I do recommend using the clips or pins for the rows, especially as the quilt rows start growing and growing and it gets a little heavier. I got all 7 rows put together, and I didn't show it in this video, but I will go back and put a stay stitch all the way around the outside of this quilt. I've got to say the colors in this fat quarter bundle were just gorgeous. I am having so much fun making donation quilts out of them. This quilt turned out just beautifully. I love it. I love the way I kept the color families together so they kind of move through the quilt. And I've got a couple of black and white photos to show you too, but the colors are just gorgeous. I hope that if you're enjoying my content, you'll subscribe to my channel and hit that bell notification icon. I also do appreciate and try to read and respond to every comment. Special thanks go out to my channel members. Before I sign off, I do want you to see exactly what I have left over from the strips. So I have some of the skinny strips left. I have one of each print in a half strip, and the cutoffs from the ends of the strip tubes. Also, that little black and white strip that I stitched together. We're going to see what happens with that. And I also have 4 extra of the strip tube blocks that I've already stitched all together. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I hope to see you back again real soon.